Okay, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up Darwin and evolution, kind of the intro to the theory of evolution lecture here. Again, remember, this wasn't just a Darwin idea. It was Wallace, it was Darwin's grandfather, it was lots of different scientists have contributed to this. Darwin gets the credit, kind of the fame and the credit, a lot of it because of his hard work and efforts towards solidifying natural selection as a mechanism of evolution. And then we talked about in the last lecture all of the different lines of evidence. Make sure you understand there are lots of lines of evidence. So we have the fossil record. All sorts of different types of fossils in the fossil record help support the theory of evolution, the concept that life evolved and changed and populations changed over time. I mean, the fossil record gives us a pretty good picture of that. Yes, there are gaps, there are missing parts to the fossil record. That's expected. That's not a shock. That's not a, oh, wow, we don't know how to explain it. We don't expect to know and find every single fossil out there. But that is a solid line of evidence. Then you get into the anatomy side of it, all the different anatomical aspects. We talked about biogeography. We talked about continental drift. All these things are lines of evidence that were available when Darwin was researching and studying natural selection and formulating his idea. One of the newest lines of evidence that is providing phenomenal evidence and support for evolution is the molecular side of things, molecular biology. So it's genetic evidence that shows the relatedness of life on Earth. All right, so there's a phenomenal amount of molecular evidence that we have, and more continues to show up. So, simple example. Why do all living things use the same basic pathway to build proteins? Start with DNA, turns into RNA, RNA turns into proteins. If life was created all at the same time, and everything was created with the same basic plan, sounds like a pretty boring creation. I would have mixed it up. I would have created a lot of variation. But when we look at some of these basic things, there's very little variation. The DNA. Remember, genetics and DNA. And A, T, C's, and G's, adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine, and then you drop down into RNA and you have that base called uracil. There's only 4 DNA letters? That's the best. If we created life, that's the best we could come up with was 4? Why not create thousands of different nucleotides? So then every species could be unique and individual and different if we're individually creating them. But if one ancestral population evolves, and then it evolves into 2 populations, and 3 populations, and 10 populations, so on, they're all going to use the same basic fundamental stuff and just kind of tweak it a little bit here and a little bit there to be more adaptable. So that molecular evidence is a huge level or a huge line of support for the theory of evolution. And when we look at molecular evidence and we look at DNA, the DNA difference is what scientists use to help extrapolate evolutionary time. All right, so DNA difference, 1% difference in DNA is approximately 5 to 6 million years of evolution. Oh, million. Should spell it right. All right, 5 to 6 million years of evolution. So here's a hypothesis. I'm going to call it fossil, species A and species B, living right now. I think, I'm going to hypothesize, they have a common ancestor back here. So I'm going to run an experiment. I'm going to look at their DNA difference. What is the DNA difference? Or we could say similarity. If there's 1% difference between these two species, I think we need to go back about 5 to 6 million years and look at the fossil record. Is there a fossil, some kind of transitional fossil that is half A and half B, about 5 to 6 million years ago? Let's look at the anatomy. Do they have similar anatomical features? Let's look at the biogeography, the geographical distribution. Do they live in a similar area? Were they on different continents? I'm going to use all those lines of evidence to support or reject my hypothesis that species A, species B have a common ancestor that they both evolved from. The ancestor is not species A. It is not species B. It's a different ancestor. So take it in real-time snapshot. My cousin and I are related. Why? Because we have a common grandparent or grandparents. How do we prove this? Well, I look at my parents. He looks at his parents. Is my father related to his father, i.e. my uncle? And then do they have the same common grandfather? That's testable. You can create a hypothesis, design your experiment, test for it. The data will either support or reject your hypothesis. And then you figure out, do I continue to try to find lines of evidence to support it? Do I reject it, scrap it, go a different route? It's all part of science. But what we see overwhelmingly, the scientific community says evolution is the best explanation for the diversity of life on Earth and the relatedness of life on Earth. And we have the lines of evidence that today still continue to support it, and more lines of evidence are continuously being explored and developed.